We're recording.
Welcome back to the Elevate Your Running podcast. We're so happy you joined us this week. We are in for a fun episode recapping this past weekend's races, the Indianapolis Monumental Marathon and then the New York City Marathon, and all of our takeaways from those two races. Sarah got to have some athletes running in the races, at least in Indianapolis, and I ran the New York City Marathon. And we feel like both of those races give us so many great takeaways to discuss today. And we're going to get into all of those. But before we do, Sarah, how are you this week?
Hey, Austin, I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing better. I'm doing better. Definitely bouncing back after travel and racing and all that fun stuff. But we'll get into all that. Sarah, do you want to open us up this week with your elevated moment?
Absolutely. So, my elevated moment is that I did not race in Indy or New York this weekend, and I chose Chicago,
Yeah.
which is funny. Okay, that's not really my elevated moment, but it is interesting that Chicago had great weather this year, and then Indy and New York just had an awful experience on both ends of the spectrum, too. Both warm, but different kind of secondary elements that
Mhm.
came into play. But we'll talk about that later. But I did have a really strong tempo run, um, 5 miles with a really good fellow runner from Denver. She came up to Boulder and we got to cruise along. And I think it's always a good sign when you can run tempo and staying in the paces. We felt good. We were chatting for the first few miles and setting me up for success, hopefully for a strong 10K in Houston this coming weekend. And shout out to Phil, who disclosed today that the course is actually hilly. So Lululemon found maybe the one hill in Houston to run this 10K on. So should be fun. Type
there's
two.
there's more hills in Texas than you may be led to believe. That's what I've learned at least in the past few months. But yeah, that's really great to hear. I forgot that you were racing in, well, I knew you were racing in Houston. I just didn't know it was this soon. So I hope you're feeling good. 10K I know is a fun distance for many people. So hopefully you get to feel good and feel strong out there and see what you can do.
Absolutely. It was a decision that I made before running Chicago and went into the mindset of it's 5 weeks after Chicago. So it's either going to be a really great race or it's going to be an absolute nightmare. Um, I feel really good and I've had some really good workouts getting back into the swing of things. So I love racing at sea level or near sea level. The weather looks pretty good. So I'm hoping these hills. Actually, one of my teammates who's also running it just texted me that it's 121 feet of elevation gain over the 10K. So hopefully that feels more like bunny hills, and I just cruise up and down and still pull out a really strong effort, which is the goal. But whether you run, ride, hike, or swim, you understand what it means to push harder, reach farther, and go the extra mile. This relentless drive runs in your blood. And that's why Inside Tracker provides you with a personalized plan to build endurance, boost energy, and optimize your health for the long haul. Created by leading scientists in aging, genetics, and biometrics, Inside Tracker analyzes your blood, your DNA, and fitness tracking data to identify where you're optimized and where you're not. You'll get a daily action plan with personalized guidance on the right exercise, nutrition, and supplementation for your body. And when you connect Inside Tracker with your Fitbit or Garmin, you'll also unlock real time recovery pro tips after you complete your workout. It's like having your own personal trainer and nutritionist in your pocket. For a limited time, you can get 20% off the entire Inside Tracker store. Just go to insidetracker.com/elevate your running. And Inside Tracker is such a great company. We appreciate their partnership. And before we started recording, I joked with Austin that maybe he should take a test this week and see what damage was done
Yeah.
running a hot and humid marathon. But we'll get into more of that later. Austin, would you like to share your elevated moment?
Yeah, absolutely. My elevated moment I think has to be the New York City Marathon for a lot of reasons. But honestly, the reason that may not be obvious is that it was hard. Like it was the hardest marathon that I've run over my, this is my third marathon. And, it really was the weather. I've never really
Yeah.
enjoyed being the type of person who admits that weather, especially heat and humidity that we dealt with in New York, can play a big factor. I've always understood that it definitely, plays into how you need to approach a race or your workout or, even an easy run. We talk about summer running and the importance of allowing yourself to slow down, but it's a different level on race day. It's a different level when you do want to see what you're capable of, but you're also running up against that wall of what is too hard and understanding that, okay, this may not be my, top level performance today, but I'm going to try to milk it for everything that is there to get. And that's really what I was dealing with in New York, but so many amazing takeaways from it that we're going to get into in
Hmm.
today's episode, and just really allowing this experience to help me develop as a runner, especially the mental side of things. Because now the next
Hmm.
time that I'm in a race, I can remember this experience and pull some of the lessons learned from it to hopefully navigate the challenges of future races. And really, my primary takeaway, and I shared this on Instagram, is that you find your true strength through struggle. And I think that's why we sign up for
Hmm.
races. That's why we run in general, is because we do want to struggle. Like we want to feel the pain that is felt through running, especially when we're trying to run fast for long distances. And that doesn't feel good in the moment. It did not feel good in the moment. Sarah, I was telling you before we recorded that, this is probably the most pain that I've felt running in general, like not even just racing. Um,
Hmm.
but at the same time, like I'm going to probably pull from that more than any other experience that I've had running. I will remember this race and learn lessons from this race more than I will from the days that came easily to me. And I think that's really important. And, if anyone who's listening raced either the Indianapolis Marathon or New York City, or you've raced a race, recently that was a struggle for you, there's a lot to pull from that. You just have to allow yourself to find it. Sometimes you find it during the run. Sometimes it takes some time to digest and really break down. I think that I'm still digesting some of the lessons that I learned from this past weekend, but just really allowing yourself to find those things because they will pay off in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an interesting it's an interesting thing that we do as runners. We sign up for a race, we pay a lot of money, we might travel to it, we spend a lot of time training for it or running to get to the start line, and you just don't really know how it's going to shake out, whether you can control everything that you can control and the uncontrollables are in your favor that day. Like I would say Buffalo for you, Austin, Chicago for me, or you have, you're controlling everything you can and the uncontrollables are not in your favor. New York for you, Boston and Mesa for me. I had two back-to-back races that were hot in very different ways, and it's definitely a situation that you get into, not really knowing how race day is going to play out, but giving it your all and doing the best that you can do. And then, like you said, Austin, like having those learning moments, those growing moments, it's a huge piece to life as a human. How many times do we get into a situation and it doesn't pan out the way that we want it to? There's usually really good growth and learning opportunities that come from that if you're willing to dig deep and look at it. So I'm really proud of you for sticking through it, finishing the race. I know a lot of people DNF'd on Sunday. A lot of people slowed their roll considerably, positive splitting through the entire, like every 5K kind of checkpoint. And that's okay too.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's an interesting mindset, and the way your mindset changes over the course of the race. Like we can kind of walk through it, but, coming into the race, you obviously see the headlines that It's going to be warm. The humidity is going to be high. A really important note for, major marathons is that you're probably starting a lot later than you would at a smaller race. Like when I
Yeah.
ran the Buffalo Marathon in May, we started at 6:30 a.m. I want to say the temperature was in the 60s for that race for the majority of it, which is obviously better weather than we had in New York City. But starting a race I started at the earliest possible time you can start as a non-professional, which is 9:10 a.m. Like anyone who, trains for a marathon, you understand that you're probably getting up on the weekends and trying to get that long run in a little bit earlier on your
Hmm.
Saturday or Sunday morning. Like you want to be out there and running early so that you can avoid the heat or just so you can get it out of the way and get on with your day. But starting at 9:10 a.m., especially after, I was on a ferry to Staten Island at 5:30 a.m. So it's already by the
Yeah.
time you're starting, you've been on the move for nearly 4 hours. So there's factors that are coming into play. And I think the message that I was giving to myself was, it's fine. Like you're gonna go out there and you're gonna give everything that you've got. Like, is everything that you've got going to be your fastest marathon ever? No, probably not. I knew I hadn't trained for that too. So that I think was actually a point of comfort in a way, is that I knew that
Yeah.
I didn't have to go out there and set the world on fire. I could just truly explore the hardship that I was going to face and see what came out of it. So I am really happy that I was in that position going into the race. But, you have those moments before where you do understand that, okay, this is going to be a little bit more of a battle than maybe I've had in the past. And, at mile 2, basically coming off of the Verrazano Bridge from Staten Island, I'm dripping sweat. And it's like, whoa,
Yeah.
that doesn't happen, on a normal day usually. And you certainly don't want it happening in a race. So, that was kind of an early moment where it's like, okay, we're going to have to navigate some things internally and allow the way that we navigate it in our mind to influence the way that we run this race.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad that you realized early on too that you needed to shift and pivot in the moment to make your goal still happen, because I think it can be really scary getting in that moment. I've been there at Boston where you're like soaking through your clothes by the first 5K and you're like, what is this? I don't train in these conditions, or I don't certainly run a marathon in these conditions. And how do I actually flow through this and get through this healthy and get to the finish line? Because your internal senses knew probably at mile 2, like, okay, we're gonna have a maybe an uphill climb today.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's what it was. And I think, when you're running that race, you're constantly assessing in your mind, what is too hard. I told you, kind of in our discussion on, the way the race unfolded, I was comfortable early on running a specific minute per mile pace. And then
Hmm.
as the race went on, that gradually got slower. But it was interesting. And I do always find it interesting to find, like, when it starts to hurt, don't just say, okay, it hurts. Like, what is actually hurting? Like, what is actually the issue? Because chances are there's parts of your body and mind that can push, and there's parts that can't. And what I
Hmm.
found in this specific race is that my legs could have maintained that pace that they were running early on in the race. But once I got to mile 12, 16, 18 to 20, the decision was based off of the fact that, okay, if I push back down to that pace, I don't really know what's going to happen. Like I told you that I had a lot of stomach issues, and that was honestly the
Hmm.
biggest issue that I ran into in the race. And the biggest thing that I had to navigate was I just need to run at a pace where I don't have to stop and go to the bathroom. Because if I have to stop, I'm going to run slower. Like it's as simple as that. I did not see a situation where I stop, use the bathroom, and then magically run faster. So that was an important point for me, was every single mile. And I was almost amazed at like how little I thought about other than how I felt, which was kind of sad for me
Mm.
going into that race, because, we talked about this on recent episodes of the podcast where I was like, I'm going to get out there and I'm going to enjoy it. I'm going to see the city. I'm just going to party down the streets of New York City. And, going into the race, you get to New York City, you get in the marathon environment, and I'm like, okay, I'm not in the best shape of my life right now, but I'm going to go out there and I'm going to see what I have, because ultimately this experience is going to be enhanced by pushing myself. Like, I don't want to walk away from New York City saying, how would you have felt if you would have run faster? What could you have run? I didn't want to be in that situation. So I knew I was going to push myself, but it just came down to like, what can I do? And if I push harder, what is going to happen? And really running up against that wall the entire time. And I mean, mile by mile, it started at mile 2. Like I told you, you run up the bridge, and then you run
Yeah.
down the bridge. And that's, you do that a few times in New York City, but that first bridge is really like, it's kind of exacerbated because it's so early on in the race that you've literally run up a hill for pretty close to a mile. It flattens out, and then you run down the hill. And once you get off the bridge, you're at like mile 2, right? So I ran my first mile at 7:55. And then coming down the bridge, I'm like, okay, I'll let my legs just kind of go. I'll pick up the pace and I'll move pretty fast, and then I'll find my rhythm. And that is what happened. But mile 1, 7:55, mile 2, 6:28. And it's like, all right, find a rhythm, because, you're not going to run 6:28 the rest of this marathon. I would not have
That's
finished
the
the race.
next one.
Yeah, would not have finished that race. I can promise you that. But once you find that rhythm, it was just a constant self-assessment of, how do you feel? Okay, lift up your head, look around, enjoy the experience, back inside. Like, now you're intrinsic again. How do I feel? What hurts? What feels good? And if you've had amazing races, and this is kind of the way it was in Buffalo for me, is like, you thought about it, you think about it on those good days, but it doesn't consume you to the extent that it does on the harder days. And I think if you ran Indianapolis, if you ran New York City, or if you've run a hard race recently, like, that feeling of, it just consumes you for pretty much 26 miles.
Yeah, it definitely does. I have been there 2 back-to-back races. I think Boston was definitely tougher than Mesa, because it was very similar weather, to New York City. It was like high 60s, low to mid 70s, very humid, high dew point. And coming from Colorado, and any Colorado listeners we have, like, we don't run in humidity, right? We run at altitude, but we don't run in humidity, and it's really tough to adjust to it. And it definitely hit me at like mile 10. And it does, when you don't have control any longer on the course, it can consume you 100%. I think when you're running a really strong race, or you're running a strong race, you hit the wall or you don't hit the wall, but maybe it starts to hurt, and then you have to make that mental shift. You're controlling that. That's what you get to control, and you get to do that. But when your body's starting to slow down and quote unquote, I call it failing, like my body is failing. For me,
Yeah.
it was mile 10 at Boston. Like, there's nothing you can really do to get out of that other than to just like hold on and hope that you can get to the finish line. Because it's this, it just is something that happens, and it's something that we just can't control. And weather is such a beast. For those that don't know, Indianapolis was the day before. Great race. It's flat-ish, it's fast. Typically, it has great weather. And just for Saturday, like the whole 10-day forecast was beautiful. And except for Saturday, it was 65 degrees for the low. It was raining, and they had 20 to 30 mile per hour winds that ended up being headwinds in the second half of the race. So the race is very similar to Chicago. Indianapolis has, I think, just a few less turns. So they run north, west, south, and then east to finish, something like that, pretty close to it. And the runners there had, about 13 miles in headwinds. And when you're running in headwinds for that long, there's going to be a point where your mind gets to take over, and it might be right in that first mile. And how long can you hold on for?
Yeah, you asked me the question, and I do want to answer it before we started recording of like,
Yeah.
what would you rather run in? Would you rather run in a
Yeah.
race with the
Okay.
headwinds, or would you rather run in the conditions that I ran in New York City with just the heat, basically the
Yeah.
continuous
Heat and
heat? And
humidity. Yeah.
in my time training in Colorado, I dealt with a lot of wind. And Sarah, I know you know this,
Yeah.
like it gets windy
Yeah.
in Colorado, especially in the fall and the spring. And I can honestly say that I would have rather run in the New York City conditions
Hmm.
because I was, even though it hurt, like I was drained. I was really struggling from miles 18 through the finish. It was at least pretty consistent. The issue that I find with wind is that you never find your rhythm. It's like constantly pushing back at you. And I get like angry at
I
wind,
do too.
especially
Yeah.
headwind. Like it just makes you want to shout into the wind. And at
Yeah.
least in New York City, I could kind of like digest what was happening a little bit. And I was actually telling somebody earlier today, New York City as a marathon and I guess as a city is known for the environment and just the energy. And the energy on that course was amazing. And really, from the spectators' perspective, it was an absolutely beautiful day. And I kind of
Yeah.
knew that coming into the race because, usually if it's really cold outside, it's like a runner's dream. But the spectators who are just standing on the street, they're going to be cold. So I knew that the streets were going to be packed. It was going to be full of energy, and it was. But this is kind of what I'm thinking about with the wind is that there were points later on in that race, running through Brooklyn, I believe it was, and then you get into Manhattan and Central Park, where I was almost like this energy, like the loud noises that are happening around me is like overwhelming me. Like I'm trying to
Hmm.
just kind of put my head down and like, listen to my thoughts and like kind of zone out. And there's so much going on that it's like exacerbating the pain that I'm feeling.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
that's the way I feel with wind too, is that you're feeling the pain enough because you're racing and racing can hurt, but then it's just constantly pushing back at you. So I do think my answer would just be just give me the consistency of the heat and the humidity. Although it'll drain you, it's really hard to push through. The wind is just, it's a different beast.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think I don't really know how I would answer that question because I like running in great conditions. And I got to run in headwinds on my tempo run on Saturday, and I thought that was really funny or ironic because here I have athletes in Indy running in, the same type of wind, but for 13 miles. And I said, "Oh, you can do it for 2.5 or whatever the second half of my tempo was." So definitely gave me the strength, but it does wind definitely, yeah, I would say wind makes me angry, but heat and humidity, you just kind of like accept it and deal with
Yeah.
it and flow with it. And we had the exact same race, just 1 year apart, one
Yeah.
year, 1 month apart. Because I felt the same way at Boston. It's like, you get into it and you just kind of like do what you have to do to get through it. But also, I hope this doesn't annoy anyone that I'm going to say this, but the Boston crowds are amazing, and the last 5K was pure torture for me because
Yeah.
I was in so much pain, and the crowds were so intense that it does kind of like amplify everything and just make everything feel uncomfortable.
Yeah. No, it's really interesting to hear that you had the same experience. Like, I was trying to come to terms with how I felt because like it's a dream, right?
Yeah, like you
For
get to
anyone
run
who
it New York.
exactly, for anyone who loves running, like I remember watching this race on TV last year and just thinking, man, I want to run that race. Like you see them running through Central Park. It's absolutely beautiful. And then there I am 12 months later, and I'm running the New York City Marathon, and I'm in Central Park. And even looking back at it now and just like trying to step outside of my body and the pain that I'm feeling, like I get chills thinking about what that environment was. But when you're in it, unless you're going to drastically pull your pace back and allow yourself to take it all in,
Mm-hmm.
you can't help but to get overwhelmed in that moment because you're just applying so much stress to your body. We're applying stress to our body enough by trying to run 26 miles at a goal pace. But then you add in the factors that are just a natural way to stress your body out. Like heat and humidity is going to drain you. I can speak to it from my experience this past week where I crossed that finish line and I don't know that I felt that much relief in a very long time. Like crossing that finish line, I didn't even feel like I wanted to celebrate there. The finish line feeling a lot of times is energy. Like that last quarter
Mm-hmm.
mile, you feel it. You're like, I am running the last quarter mile of a marathon. You cross that finish line, and it's electric. It was not electric. Like the power was out. I was completely drained. I was like, New York
Oh.
City, like it basically takes you out of Central Park, like the long stretch that the runners walk to get out of Central Park and meet up with, their families or whoever's there spectating with them. I walked like another mile, maybe more than a mile, and it was just like pitiful. Like me trying to walk out of Central Park was just a
Yeah.
joke. And it's hard. And you do have to understand the situation that you're in when you're in it. And I think one way to kind of pivot this conversation to something that can be really tangible and important for our listeners is like, how do we recognize those moments, and what can we take away from maybe moments of our training and things that if we're in this type of situation, how can we get the best out of both our performance and our experience? So Sarah, I'd be interested to kind of let you begin on that topic of, you've been in those types of moments. I was in that type of moment this past weekend. So for you, like, what are you pulling upon in those moments, either from your training or from other races that kind of give you the blurry roadmap to understand how to navigate that challenge?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's so there's two ways to look at it, right? Or there's two different circumstances. You can have something like weather that's coming into play where going into it, you just have to slow your roll. Like that's just the way it is. Sorry, this is what we do. We get into these races. We don't know what the weather is going to be like, and we have to be okay with that. It doesn't mean I'm going to ever be okay with that. If I'm training really hard and you get to the start of the race and you can't go full send or do what you want to or create what you want to create on the course, I think that's really tough. But so there's that side of things, but then there's also like when you're in the race and you're feeling good, and let's say you do start to have some body niggles, or you feel like, oh, I'm at the 20-mile mark and I'm having this like maybe it's more mental at that point of like I'm at the infamous 20-mile mark and I'm gonna hit the wall, which I think a lot of people play up way too much, by the way. So it's like, what do you do in those circumstances? I think first and foremost, you have to know yourself. And we talk about this all the time on the podcast. You get to learn who you are as an athlete and who you are as a human and what you're able to take on and flow through, and also what's not okay to flow through. So, workouts are a great example of, if you're going through a hard workout and you feel like maybe it's the last rep, you want to hit a certain time, you feel like, you're feeling a little tired. That's a great way to shift your mind and know that you can do it and it's going to be okay. If it's an 800, a 1K, a 1 mile, whatever it is. Now, let's say you start having niggles in that same workout and your knee's starting to hurt. That's not the time to push through it, right? It's very similar to your New York race, Austin. Like you were feeling the heat, humidity, you knew two things were going to happen if you pushed the pace. Like you were having stomach issues and you also weren't really sure how long you were going to be able to hold on at that discomfort because it's a totally different level of discomfort. It's putting yourself in harm's way to a certain extent. And I would say pushing through an injury or a niggle or something that's coming up um, in your workout or in your long run can also do that same thing. So it's recognizing what's happening, being aware of your body, and then deciding what to do. Do you flow through it? Is it something you can flow through? Is it a mental barrier? Or is it actually something physical going on that it's not worth being able to, or not worth flowing through?
Yeah. For me, it's all experience based, and a statement that I love. I love the simplicity of it. I remember the first time I heard it, it was really comforting for me. As I actually heard it for the first time as a new teacher, and it's that you don't know what you don't know. And
Oh,
I
yeah.
just I just remember hearing that and being like, oh, okay, like there's no shame in not knowing what I don't know, but recognizing what I don't know will help me to learn and then to
Yeah.
build upon that foundation of knowledge. For me, it's all about experience. Like, this race, I'm kind of training towards a larger goal here in the next few months. So I was really using New York as the ability to have a stepping stone, not necessarily leveraging a taper, which we obviously, and everyone would recommend for someone who wants to get the most out of a race. So I say that because the first few miles, and honestly the shakeout run before the race, the day before, my legs were heavy. Like my legs were sore. I had aches in my lower legs, which have
Mm.
kind of been a little bit achy the past few weeks. So, I knew that pain was there, and I felt it. Honestly, that first bridge, like the first 2 miles, I felt the pain. It stuck with me for, probably the first 10 or so miles. But what I did know, because I've been through this and I've felt pain in my legs before on like long runs or speed workouts, is that at some point you do find a rhythm.
Mm-hmm.
And I did find a rhythm. And that leg pain, until like the obvious point of a marathon where it just kind of all starts to set in and everything really starts to hurt, that leg pain was not the issue. The issue was actually something that I haven't dealt with before, which was, the GI distress, like the stomach issues. So, I'm running at mile, I probably noticed it as an issue for the first time around mile 8, and then it kind of comes and goes. But as you continue to
Mm.
push and stress your body, like that thing that was an underlying issue becomes the issue that you have to deal with. So by mile 18, it was really a battle of, okay, whatever I do around this single issue of my, what my stomach's going to do or not do, like that's going to determine how I finish this race. And it was just a constant thought process of, do I need to stop? Okay. I don't think I need to stop, but I've never been in this situation before, at least to this extent. Like most training runs, let's be honest, if you have a stomach issue and you feel the need, like, oh, I might need to stop, if you have an opportunity, you're going to stop, right?
Yeah.
In a race, it's a completely different environment. Like at all costs, you hope to not have to, because I knew if I did, I was going to lose minutes off my time. And even though I wasn't attached to that time, I just didn't want it to happen. And honestly, I knew that by being in that situation, if God forbid I'm in that situation again in a race that has a little bit, more riding on it, at least in my mind, now because I've been through that experience, I can call upon that. And it's not a matter
Mm-hmm.
of, well, you don't know what you don't know. I do know it now. At least in that
Yeah.
situation, I know that, okay, I was able to push through. I mean, was it comfortable? No, it's not really fun running the last 8 miles of a race, especially a race as amazing as the New York City Marathon, worrying about whether you've got to go to the porta potty. Like, that's not a fun situation to be in.
No.
But I think looking back on it, it was an important experience to push through. And just to understand that experience, although it was probably the hardest experiences that I've one of the hardest experiences that I've had as a runner, it made me stronger because now I've gathered that information that I can apply to a future experience race, probably.
Yeah. You left clues for yourself, Austin,
Yeah.
on the course. Yeah, and that's a fair point. Like we as athletes don't know everything about ourselves, and we can get into races and something that's never happened in training can come up. And, I think it's just diving in and leaning into your instincts and knowing that you can just do the best that you can do in that particular moment, and it's all going to be okay. Like for Indy, going into Indy, I had two marathoners, and um, we had a race plan, had race calls like the week before, and then I touched base with them the day before because the weather had changed and the wind was looking bad and really strong in the second half. So we formulated a whole new strategy. But then I also talked to them individually about lean into what feels okay. So we talked about maybe going out slightly faster in the first half, which is something I would never recommend. But knowing that they had a tailwind, going out slightly faster in the first half would bank a little bit of time as they turn the corner to fight the headwinds. Or the other option was to just pull the pace back all the way around, which is very similar to what 99% of the athletes did at New York. You just decide before you even start that you're running something slower than your anticipated goal, or the goal that you want to hit, your A goal. And it's all up to the athlete, right? As a coach, it's giving them the information and letting them decide on race day how they want to execute. And I said to both of them, I said to both of them, like, if you go out 5 seconds faster or 10 seconds faster per mile in the first half, it still has to feel easy. And if it doesn't feel easy, then you have to pull back and be okay knowing that you're probably not going to hit your A goal. You're probably not going to hit your B goal. When you're fighting winds that intense for that long, there's going to be a breaking point. I don't think I actually said that to them on the call because you want them to have their minds to be able to take over and to continue to push through it. I just didn't see anyone on Saturday execute that in the marathon distance. So everyone kind of had a breaking point at to some degree. But I think it's also fair to say, like, you get to learn from these experiences and use them. So when you do get into a position the next time, or maybe it's 5 marathons from now and the same thing pops up, that you're able to shift and pivot a little bit faster, quicker, and maybe feel more at ease in the moment. Because Austin, like, the last 8 miles for you were really stressful in the race, but maybe when you get into it next time, you won't feel as stressed about it because you've been there and you'll have a little bit more intel on what to do and what not to do. Um, just my personal advice on stopping for the restroom, it's definitely hard. It's definitely hard to do that and then to pick up goal pace again. Um, I I don't think we talked about this on the podcast, but I did have to go to the bathroom at Chicago. And I told myself, if you're not doing it by the first 10K, you're not going. Like, you're not stopping. And
Yeah.
the thing about Chicago is that the porta potties are down the street, they're not on the race course. So that made the decision for me because I did not want to run down a side street to use the bathroom to run back on the course. And it worked out fine. After the 10K, I forgot about it. I think it was just like nerves, and it was fine. And it ended up being fine. And I never thought about it again. But it is something where once you get into a flow state, and I think anyone who was watching the New York City broadcast on Sunday saw this happen with our Brazilian elite friend who went out hot, Kipchoge hot. And he ended up using the porta potty at mile 20. But then what you saw is very common with a lot of athletes, where he just couldn't get back into the flow. He couldn't get back into the groove. He ultimately, I think, just a mile down the road, DNF'd and couldn't continue on. So there is that component to think about too. Maybe as a side tangent, maybe as just whatever you want to call it. But when you stop to do something like that, know that you might lose your flow altogether. And sometimes you get right back into pace and it feels natural, you feel good, and you're ready to go. I think what happened with the elite who did it at mile 20 was it was a little late in the race and he went out way too hot. So maybe if he was running a little bit closer to goal pace, he would have been able to pick it right back up.
There was a lot of, value for me in the fact that I went into this race without an A, B, or C goal. And I
Oh
really,
yeah.
I believe heavily in, training for a specific goal. But, we've discussed this in the past. I made the decision months ago that this wasn't the time to really chase something. So going into this race, it was truly just about what can you do? Like I was honestly curious.
Yeah.
And curiosity is a really beautiful thing. And I think we need to embrace it as athletes because that entire race was curiosity. It was, and this is the disgusting reality of running. It was like, what's going to happen if I don't stop and use the bathroom right now? I'm curious. I'm happy that the answer that I got was, the correct answer. But it was
Me
honestly,
too.
it was curiosity of not just what time am I going to run to finish this race, but how am I going to feel if I push in this way? How am I going to feel if I don't allow myself to stop? And, that's really valuable. Like embrace curiosity, embrace it first and foremost in your training. And then because you've embraced it in your training, you can embrace it on race day as well. And that's possible whether you have an A goal for a race or not. And maybe this is, advice for somebody if you feel like you're constantly chasing a goal and you feel like you're constantly setting the bar higher and higher. You're not lowering the bar by saying that you just want to go out there and run and see what you can do. That's not lowering the bar. That's not lowering the standard. That's allowing yourself to, really be inquisitive about who you are from the mental strength side of things, but also, where your fitness is at any given time. Sarah, for you running a 10K this weekend, like, is it optimal to run a 10K 5 weeks after a marathon? Absolutely not. But you're curious. Like you're
Yeah.
interested to see what's going to happen. It may be an awful day. It may be a great day. Maybe if it's a great day, does that mean that running a 10K 5 weeks after a marathon is the way to go? Absolutely not. No.
No.
But
No.
but it's just collecting data and it's just like being
Yeah.
curious and having fun with it. Like let's have fun with it. Um there's a lot of fun to be had out there, and I think the trap that I was really afraid of in August, like I did not expect, like let's rewind, I ran my first marathon last November. It was a year to the day that I ran New York City this past weekend. If you would have told me that I was going to run the sub 3 hour marathon that I ran this past May in Buffalo, I I probably would have believed you, but it wouldn't have been what I would have predicted for myself. I didn't see it coming. So when I ran that race, the natural inclination is to say, okay, now I'm going to train and run faster. Like I had already signed up for the New York City Marathon. So naturally, what we do is we set the bar higher and we go out there and we try
Mhm.
to run the race faster. And I didn't do that. I mean, I ran 18 minutes slower, but it was a
Yeah.
win. This past weekend was a win. And I was proud of what happened this past weekend out on that course because I'm stronger for it. Like time is not strength. Strength is found in struggle. If you allow yourself to struggle and get in uncomfortable situations, don't always put yourself in an optimal situation. Get out there and see what the heck's going to happen when you're uncomfortable. That is
Oh,
important data to collect.
100%. And I'm really glad that you said that because I don't know if people pick up on this about me, but I love optimal running and I love putting myself in like really great situations to
Yeah.
run fast. And, I think some of it comes from having some races, um, like, years ago or a few years ago where I've gone out too hard and just have completely bonked. And that's like scarred me in some ways because it's like I wouldn't wish it on anyone. Yet it does make you grow as an athlete. It does make you stronger. You have more resilience. You have the ability to shift and pivot when it happens again on the course for sure. But I am really proud of you, Austin, for pushing and flowing through the New York City and finding that strength and that courage and that curiosity throughout all of it. Um, because it's not an easy thing to do. And it's something that we get to do. And it does make us stronger in the end, hands down.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I think that's a good wrapping point, at least for me.
Yeah, I
Um,
think also what I'm hearing you say is that I get to run some hills in Houston this weekend, and I should use them as a mental strength and as a challenge versus I thought I was going to roll into this thing and just like crush it
yeah,
flat and fast. I mean, I feel pretty good, so theoretically should, but hills are probably one of my harder road elements to run through. So
yeah.
I get
Well,
to do it.
that's a good point to make before we do wrap it is, running New York City, all in all, it's a good course. Like you can run a
Hmm.
fast time in New York City, obviously in better weather conditions than we had this past year. But what I did see is, there's hills. The Central Park was
Oh
brutal.
yeah,
I did not expect Central Park to be what it was. Like you're in Central Park for, I don't know, like 5 miles, felt like 5 miles at least. And I swear I was running up a hill for 3.5.
yeah,
It's pretty gnarly. And there's a, everyone know I'm obviously horrible with the names of these bridges and everything like that, but you hit a bridge at like mile 15, right? And it's that moment of the course that everyone talks about because you hit that bridge and it's completely silent. And that bridge is a very long uphill. Like you're constantly climbing, it's dead silent. All you hear are the footsteps. So in that moment, you have the choice. Either I'm going to push this hill, like I'm going to push myself and we're going to get through it and see what happens. That's a risk. Like there's a risk to pushing on any hill because it can
hmm,
gas you out. You can cramp, like you never know. And then what I saw a lot on that bridge was that people are slowing down drastically or they're stopping completely and walking.
hmm,
And, stepping back from that race experience, I think the thing that was going through my mind was it was a question of why did they stop? Like, was it fear of the unknown of what happens when you push through that? Or was it just that the pain overwhelmed them to the point that they felt like they couldn't do it anymore? There's
yeah,
situations where, like, let's say you do pull a cramp in your hamstring, a cramp's going to stop you in your tracks. But that's not really what I was seeing. I was seeing people just slowly pulling the pace back and stopping. And then they found the comfort of, I stopped. But guess what? That comfort that you find when you stop is very quickly followed up by the realization that you didn't find out what would have happened if you kept going. And it's in large part, I think, a part of like, what do you identify with? Do you identify with that curiosity of, I'm going to push and I'm going to, see what happens on this hill in this dark moment where I think the thing I didn't realize about that bridge is that I knew it was going to be dead silent, but I didn't know that you were going to be completely covered by the top of the bridge. So it's also dark in there too. And so what's going to happen in that dark moment, like both figuratively and realistically, you
yeah,
don't know. But guess what? You push through that hill, you realize that you realize that you are strong. Maybe you begin to identify as a strong hill runner, which I think is something that I did in this race. And you come off that hill or off that bridge, and the energy is insane. Absolutely insane. I mean, I was floating off that bridge.
yeah,
And you shouldn't be floating after you push a hill for just about a complete mile, but you realize that there's strength there. And a lot of energy comes from realizing how much strength you have.
absolutely. I'm going to be channeling that on Sunday in my race. And it's a it's a really great point too that as athletes we continue to grow and as we continue to be consistent and move the needle in our training and move the needle in our running, you find those wins along the way and those wins can keep us going, right? We keep chasing the carrot win, and keep going after it. And I think it's a cool way to set yourself up for success eventually and hitting that, like, your long-term goal of whatever it is. For me, it's a sub 3. Austin, who knows? You're unstoppable. You just ran the New York City Marathon.
Yeah, we're all unstoppable. And I do want to end
Yeah.
on a thought that I had before the race because, I put this thought out there before the race, before I knew what was actually going to occur on race day. And, you can anticipate struggle, but when it actually happens, that is where you truly learn the lessons and like take away the experience of it all. But my thought before the race was that racing is great because you don't need a perfect training cycle. You don't need ideal weather. You don't need the greatest plan in the world. I had none of those. All you need is the willingness to empty the tank.
Yeah.
I emptied the tank on that course, and I hope that everyone who signs up for a race and runs a race allows yourself to empty the tank. Endurance training is a very interesting thing because it's not a sprint. You can't say, okay, I'm going to give every bit of my energy for 10 seconds. It's not that. Emptying the tank in endurance sports is a slow drip of like, okay, I'm seeing what I can do sustainably for this mile. And then I'm carrying that over to the next mile. And then somehow you have to do the math in the proper way and solve the equation of, okay, once I cross the finish line, did I empty the tank? And it's hard to do. I will say the weather makes it a little bit easier to feel like that, if you're in bad conditions, like it's a little bit easier to feel like you did get completely everything out of yourself on the course. But, ask yourself that question. Are you truly leaving it all out there? Are you finding, the strategy that's unique to you to, fulfill your greatest potential, even if it's not the greatest potential that you're going to have in a year? For me, it's not the greatest potential that I had, I guess about 6 months ago, but I didn't need perfect. I didn't need ideal. I just needed to be there. I needed to put myself in that situation, and I needed to find what it was going to take to cross that finish line and truly say that, yeah, I got everything out of myself on that day. And I did. And I hope that everyone who signs up for a race can walk away or limp away saying, I got everything out of myself on that day.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. And it's a lot easier to do that in a situation you were in versus a situation I was in a
Yeah.
month ago
Yeah.
and cruising in through the finish line. So, but I've been there. I felt like Boston was very similar of just telling myself to get to the finish line. That's all you have to do, and take it mile by mile, step by step, hill by hill, and do what you can do to get it done.
Yeah. Yep. Well, we hope that everyone enjoyed this episode. I hope that there was a lot of value there. We talk a lot about community on this podcast and the importance of community and running. And I think that this is a really unique, opportunity. Like you see people run major marathons or maybe just like, a race that you're following or that you run yourself. And what are the experiences that people are taking away? Like these are common things and there's lessons that can be learned. We hope that we provided you with some perspectives that you can take into your own running and racing. And if you enjoyed it, we would love if you reached out to us through social media. We would especially love it if you left a review and followed the podcast on whatever platform that you're listening to. But if you'd like to reach out, you can find me specifically on Instagram at Austin Myers 12. And Sarah, where can they connect with you and the Elevate Your Running brand?
Instagram and Twitter at Sayrah, Sayrah runs happy, and at Elevate Your Running. Feel free to send us your elevated moments as well. And we're getting close to 10,000 downloads on the podcast, which is very exciting. And, we're going to try and get a special guest in to celebrate that milestone. So keep downloading, keep listening. We love you all. We hope you have a great week.